Hello and welcome to another one of our graduate case study reviews. I'm Dr. Rebecca Troy, owner and founder of Retrain the Dyslexic Brain. And today we are going to celebrate one of our client graduates who was 12 at the beginning of the 5 months we worked together and then did have a birthday into her 13th year. So today we're celebrating Izzy. And she had just absolutely massive gains. So she went from being 85% accurate in her phonological awareness to 98% accurate. Her reading on the wide range achievement test 5 went from the 4th to the 45th percentile in 5 months. Her spelling scores went from the 2nd percentile to the 16th, with 98% of those being phonetically correct. And again, all of this data changed in a span of just 5 months. So these are quotes from her mother. The key benefits aren't just skills, but also independence, family harmony, and confidence. If you've tried multiple programs without breakthrough, this is different. It focuses on rewiring how the brain connects sounds and letters rather than endless workarounds. So with that, I would love to just kind of take a moment to tell you a little bit more about our process so that you understand more fully what you're about to listen to and what this data really means. So in the Retrain the Dyslexic Brain program, we are actually taking neuroscience techniques and strategies and we are bringing them right into your home. And so everything that we're about to talk about is a step-by-step process and program that we coach families through right from the heart of their living room. So I have a background in neuroscience and reading disability. I've been supporting reading specialists for decades, and a few years ago, we made the decision to actually give these tools to families. We were just finding that there were so many families who were under-supported and underserved, finding that whether it was their school that didn't have the capacity to actually make meaningful change, or the tutor that they had been seeing made minimal, if any, results at all, or, it could have been a number of other various things, but the bottom line is that families just really didn't have access to the kinds of cutting edge neuroscience techniques that we knew that it took to actually reorganize how the brain is responding to language. So everything that you are about to see and hear is actually work that Merlisa, the mother we're about to celebrate, did with our coaching and support. So we do see consistently that our clients are making 50 percentile points of growth on average over this period of months. And so we're excited to share another one of those cases today, this instance being Izzy, a 13-year-old girl. So before we get too far into things, I do want you to have a deeper understanding of dyslexia specifically and what is actually going on in the brain. So what you'll see on the screen is actually an fMRI image of two people, one having a dyslexic profile, that's this one on the right, and the one on the left is a non-dyslexic person during a language task. And that's an important distinction because if we were to look at these two individuals any other time, we wouldn't notice that there are these major differences. By and large, most of the things that they have in common are the same. But when we ask these two people to spell something or read this word or write that paragraph, listen to these words, and then I want you to read that back to me. There is a very major difference in how the brain is responding that I want you to more deeply understand. So in the person that does not have dyslexia or the neurotypical brain, you'll notice that if these are the eyes up front, that there is activity in this back part of the brain that we call the occipital lobe, and that's where vision is controlled. And then you'll notice that there's also activity in the sides of the brain that we call the parietal temporal lobes, where we process sound. So you'll notice that if we have the word cat up in front of the child and their eyes take that information in, I see these letters, my brain activates during that, I can actually take in that imagery, and I also have the neural capacity to connect that to sound. So sight and sound are working in this person's brain. But when you go over to a person with dyslexia, you'll notice that there is underdevelopment in these areas. We literally do not have activity in this back part of the brain in the occipital lobe, which is why if you see cat, your child may look at that and say, mouse, mat, maybe. They're saying things that seem inappropriate. They're adding letters in that don't belong. They might be omitting letters or even entire syllables that should be there. And so that doesn't mean that they're not smart. It doesn't mean that they're not trying. It just means that their brain literally does not have activity in these areas. And it's the same thing when we look at the sound. So in this parietal temporal lobe, we have far less activity than a typical reader. And so hearing the word is very, very difficult. And so oftentimes we'll hear parents report that they've taken their child to the audiologist. I'm wondering if we've got issues with hearing, because it just seems that when I say something, they can't even say it back to me in the same way. I'm wondering what's going on. Well, it's this neurological disconnect right here. So it's important to understand that the brain is physically different. It is neurobiologically different than a typical reader. But here's what's really important for you to understand. Just like plasticity is possible for everyone. We've seen instances of the brain changing after people have had significant injury, amputation, stroke. They've been able to show physical evidence of the brain changing after those injuries because of a process called neuroplasticity. So the brain is able to create change if you do the right things, and if you do them with repetition, you can actually create a different response. And so they've done this with London cab drivers. They've done this with people, who have physically changed their brain after a period of meditation. We know that this is possible. And in fact, it is possible for a reader with dyslexia also. So we've seen this across multiple studies that it is possible to reorganize the brain of a child or a person. This can even happen in adults too, with dyslexia, so that we are actually using the same parts of the brain to read and spell that a typical reader would. So let's talk about what that looks like in real time. Like, how does this actually impact a human? So we'll look at her numbers, and then we'll also hear her story. So for Merlisa and Izzy specifically, this was something that they recognized at an early age. So Merlisa's mother, or Izzy's grandmother, was a former kindergarten teacher. And so she had noticed that there were some difficulties, and she did suspect dyslexia. She mentioned that to Merlisa when Izzy was about 4 years old. So they did have an eye exam because they thought, well, maybe that's what's going on. So they had her checked, and in fact, she did show perfect vision. But there is family history on both sides that did reveal dyslexia. So if you don't know this, dyslexia is highly heritable. Anywhere between 50 to 84% of cases actually happen through genetics. And so, all of the signs were lining up that this might be, in fact, what Izzy is dealing with. So in her elementary years, Marlisa said, we tried 100 different things. They read Bob books. They did the Susan Barton program. They did learning to read in 100 lessons. She said, we did everything that we could get our hands on to try to help Izzy to make progress. And some worked a little, but Izzy plateaued around a first grade level for years. And so, that can often be true where kids will actually come to master their letters, and maybe they have some mastery over sounds, but the progress definitely doesn't continue. And she had made minimal, if any, progress at all after that. So by fourth grade, she did have formal testing in Hawaii that labeled her as severely dyslexic. Mom said she was the worst that they had ever seen in their clinic. And so often, I think that's important to mention, because parents do get this information, and often it's like, oh, well, there's just nothing we can do. This is a severe case. This is what it is. But there is actually a lot that you can do, and Izzy's a beautiful example of that. So Merlisa would often read to Izzy so she could understand. She said Izzy's comprehension was strong auditorily, but her independent reading was very poor. Something that's challenging, and it happens to a lot of clients, is that her younger sister surpassed her in reading. And so while she was really supportive of Izzy trying to get help and trying to improve, it was also very discouraging for her to see her younger sister surpass her skills. And so at age 12, Izzy was put into a new class setting for homeschool. So they go to like a co-op, and they had all of these kids together. And at that point, she realized that her peers were reading fluently. She felt embarrassed, frustrated, and dependent on others reading for her. And it was at this point that they reached out for our help and began doing the Retrain the Dyslexic Brain program. So her initial assessment had her at the fourth percentile for reading and the second percentile for spelling. Izzy admitted that at first she was sad and she didn't want what she felt was like another subject. This is another something that I have to do, Mom. I feel sad about that. And she admitted that she thought it might be just another program that wouldn't work. And so that's true too. And I think that's important to talk about, that a lot of kids have tried a lot of things by the time they reach our doorstep. And so they can have a really big story around what's possible or whether or not anything could work in the future. But despite that, she knew that she really wanted to grow and she didn't want to be embarrassed anymore in front of peers. And so then they dug in and they did the daily practice for 10 to 15 minutes. It wasn't always perfect, but it was steady. Mom said, I was sometimes skeptical, but after hearing that the brain could be retrained rather than only compensated for, I was willing to take the plunge and go for it and do the work that needed to be done. So when we looked at her journey specifically, it was around module 6 that Izzy started to have some major milestones with books and really big breakthroughs. So Izzy finished her first chapter book in a harder series in under a week. And that was compared to earlier when it would take her a month to complete what she considered to be a really lower level book. She now was reading chapter books in a week. She had a huge confidence boost for the first time ever. She said letters no longer switched around. She could read smoothly and understand meaning without rereading every word. Izzy felt joy and relief. Yes, I finally understand what this means when I'm reading. She had major schoolwork changes. So before, lessons dragged 8 to 10 hours a day with tears and exhaustion. So that's really hard, right? You know, whether you're the child or you're the parent that's trying to homeschool this child, it's very, very difficult to be doing lessons and school for 8 to 10 hours when you're frustrated and you've got tears and exhaustion. But now she's celebrating that she finished 8 subjects independently in 4 hours. And she said it was before lunch. You know, she really, really was excited that she got everything done that she needed to for the day before lunch, all 8 subjects. And then she got to have the rest of the day to do fun kid things, which is really, really a joy for everybody in her family. I didn't hit the 2 p.m. brain wall anymore. Her love of reading majorly shifted. So for her birthday, she got a Kindle and she devoured all 3 of the Hunger Games novels. Plus, then she found out that there were 2 additional spin-off novels, and she read those also, which put her at 5 novels in a month. So, I mean, it took us a month to go through one lower level book, and now she's at a place where she's reading 5 novels in a month. She enjoys reading without needing Audible. So, like most kids with dyslexia, they can comprehend amazingly well if somebody else is reading to them. But now she's actually able to do that and enjoy reading on her own without needing that support. Her writing and spelling took a major leap, so she could successfully spell complex words by sound, like enthusiasm and conscience. Her confidence gained. She felt secure knowing that she could at least spell all of these words phonetically correct. And they got to experience some great wins as a family too. So her younger sister, who was performing better than her, was very supportive throughout this process and was cheering her on. Her dad, which was also dyslexic, even tried the activities with the tiles, and they said it was a comic relief for them to watch dad make the wrong answers. Which, by the way, we have had a lot of parents go through the program with their children because they too are dyslexic. And if you're curious about that, you can watch Julie's testimonial. She, as a parent, did the program with her daughter and had tremendous results too. But mom celebrated regularly with other parents that it was a night and day difference. She said, I talk about this all the time with my friends, and they just can't believe the difference in Izzy and how she's showing up. Um, when I asked Izzy, like, what would you want to say to other kids? She said, well, at first it feels just like another subject, but stick with it because in the end, it really does pay off. Progress helps overcome shame when your peers seem ahead. You can catch up. And that was just such a powerful thing to hear her say because she believes in growth mindset. She understands now that she's got the capacity when given the tools, when actually helping her brain to connect letters and sounds, she has the capacity to catch up. And she believes that now, which I think is just terrifically powerful. Um, Merlisa emphasized a few things to parents. She said the program may look silly at first, for an older child because we're talking about games and candies and Cheerios, but just embrace it. The key was consistency, even when it felt slow at times. After years of trying dozens of interventions, this was the first program with tangible, significant results. It did take effort. It wasn't effortless, but each module, and even though each module sometimes took longer than they expected, it was still just 5 months. And in 5 months, they had real gains that stood in stark contrast to 8 years of plateau. And so Izzy had some tangible moments of clarity, which included finishing her first chapter book quickly, proof of the tangible growth that had happened. She was independent in her schoolwork. She was no longer tethered to her mom as a reading tutor. There was a shift from reading avoidance to I can't put books down. She gained confidence in writing and spelling, phonemes independently, attempting complex vocabulary, but most importantly, she had a new self-belief. Izzy saw herself not as the kid who can't, but as someone who got better and can inspire others. So it was really awesome. And if you're interested in this, I would highly recommend you to watch Merlisa and Izzy's celebration video. Not all kids want to get on and celebrate themselves after completing the program, but Izzy really did. And she had some really beautiful insights to share. So I would highly recommend that you head over to YouTube and watch her celebration video because she said, I want to inspire somebody and I want to be an example of someone who got better and inspired others, which I think is just great. Merlisa said, if you've tried multiple programs without breakthrough, and she said, I just really want other parents to know this to be true because I was that mom. Like I was frustrated, I was overwhelmed. We had done everything. But even if you're in that place, she said, what I want other people to know is even if you've tried multiple programs without a breakthrough, this is different because it's actually focusing on rewiring how the brain connects letters and sounds rather than endless workarounds. And so I think that that's a key distinction that she mentioned and something that's really, really important. If you don't fundamentally go back to the root cause that is making it difficult for the brain to process in this way and reorganize how that works, there will always be this perpetual struggle. And so it's really, really important to acknowledge that they made that shift and they did teach Izzy's brain how to connect letters and sounds. And she is having an entirely different experience now because of it. Mom did say consistency matters more than perfection. 10 to 15 minutes daily builds that habit. Progress might feel slow at first, but the cumulative gains are dramatic in a short span. We're talking months, not years. The key benefits aren't just skills, but also independence, family harmony, and confidence. And I think that that's really important too, because when you think about the difference between Merlisa and Izzy spending 8 to 10 hours every single day, crying, tears, frustration, getting through, with a slog versus I'm independently doing this before lunch, that is life changing. And it's something that does, I'm sure, improve family harmony and also Izzy's independence and confidence. So I think those are super powerful instances and stories to tell. And then she said, the celebrations were really important too. So we celebrated her first fast book. We celebrated a shorter school day. We celebrated her eagerly reading, her pride right in writing. And she felt like those celebrations are just as important as the data percentiles because they fuel your motivation to keep going. And we do coach our clients in this all the time. It's just like running a marathon. You don't just celebrate when you cross the finish line. You have to have the mindset of celebrating all of the little milestones along the way. I made it to this. I made it to this. I've got better. I've moved further. And so really having that coaching and leaning into that is really, really important as well. So let's take a look at Izzy's data and I'll help walk you through why this is so significant. So I mentioned this at the top of our call that these were her data. This is her data snapshot. But let's take a little deeper look. So when she did this phonological awareness assessment at the beginning, it was her brain's ability to actually hear all of the sounds, be able to pull some out, put them back together. So she was 85% accurate with that at the beginning, 98% accurate with that within just 5 months' time. So definitely something major had shifted there. Next, what we're going to be talking about are statistics. So before we dive into that, I want to make sure that you have an understanding. This is the normal distribution curve, the middle being the 50th percentile or average. So you'll see that there are these lines that go up from the mean. So these are called standard deviations above the mean. And these lines 1, 2, 3 below the mean are called the standard deviations below the mean. But basically, when we're looking at statistical significance and we're trying to determine how much growth is this and how statistically significant is this, there are some key metrics that you need to know about to know whether or not to evaluate it as good or not. So let's imagine that the child would be performing at this red line at the 50th percentile. Researchers have actually measured how much growth is typical in an entire school year. So I'll show you a reference later, but this is a lot of John Hattie's work. And he's found that if you grow a typical amount from the beginning of the school year to the end, for most kids, that's a 0.3 of a standard deviation. So again, if this is a full standard deviation to go from this line to this line, or a 1.0, a 0.3 is what we would typically grow in a school year. So when we're talking about interventions and actually getting a child to catch up to their peers, we know that they're behind, we know we want to catch them up, we have to grow more than what would typically happen in a school year. So when we look at moderate statistical significance, this is a 0.5 of growth or a half of a standard deviation. But if you want it to be statistically significant, meaning that you know without a shadow of a doubt that the intervention that you've implemented has had a positive, statistically significant impact on that child, it needs to be a 0.8 or more. So that would be almost a full standard deviation of growth from the beginning to the end. So let's take a look at what that data looked like for Izzy. So before she started working with us, she was here at this red dot at the 4th percentile. So again, if she would have made the growth that would be typical of a child in an entire school year, she would have made it to this yellow dot. And that's pretty common for a lot of the people that we speak to. Like, yes, we've made some progress, but it's not blowing our socks off. We're not seeing the statistically significant growth. We're not seeing major changes in our child. We're just seeing some minimal, if any, progress. And so if the course would have had a statistically significant impact, meaning we know for sure that Retrain the Dyslexic Brain had a positive impact on her reading, she would have made it to this tan line here. But Izzy actually made it 1, 2, and maybe another quarter standard deviations of growth from where she started in 5 months, which is just absolutely fantastic, unheard of statistically. So we're super proud of this data, but here's what is more important for Izzy. She went from being low average, like really, almost 2 full standard deviations below the mean to being right at average. She's just below the 50th percentile and moving up all the time. But this, again, was in 5 months' time, which is super, super important if your child has been going like Izzy for years, just making little gains. And like Merlisa said, she was kind of plateaued and couldn't move past the 1st grade level. to make these massive leaps in that short period of time is truly life-changing. And so let's take a look at what that looked like in her spelling as well. So similar profile, she started at the second percentile. So again, had she made that growth, that would have been typical in an entire school year, would have been that yellow dot. If she had statistically significant growth in spelling, it would have been this brown dot. But again, she went 1.5 standard deviations of growth to the 16th percentile. If we look at all the words that she spelled phonetically correct, meaning that she had every single sound represented, even in really, really hard words, but she might have missed a letter. Maybe she instead of putting an EE, she put an EA for the pattern. Had she had those right too, she would have been at the 98th percentile for spelling. So Izzy's next horizon is to work on her spelling patterns, which again, she has this belief now that she can grow, she can do this. So that's what she's working on now, is to help her to, grow in those advanced spelling patterns. But when she masters that, she's going to be up here in spelling too, which is just absolutely phenomenal. So I do want to just celebrate Merlisa in this process, because this happens through our joint partnership. We cannot wave a magic wand over a child. Yes, this program is amazing, and it's not done through magic. It is done through daily consistency, which Merlisa provided. It is, something she was able to do in 5 months' time. She leaned into our coaching, both in the strategy and the mindset support. So we do coach clients through this entire process, but you have to be willing to engage. And we do not let clients into the program unless they are committed to being coached through this process. So if you don't want to be coached and you just want to be left alone to do it on your own, this is not for you. But if you are actually looking to be embedded in this process, you want somebody to coach you and help you along so that you know exactly what to do to support your child, then this is absolutely for you. She made learning fun, and she celebrated Izzy's wins. And she went full in on this idea that neuroplasticity can work. If you go into it with the belief that there's nothing I can do, this just is what it is, it will never work with you, for you. It's that self-fulfilling mind prophecy. So she was decisive, she was coachable, resourceful, consistent, only missed a few days. But absolutely followed the process. So she said, again, after years of trying dozens of interventions, this was the first program with tangible, significant results. And again, that comes back to the foundational work that we did, helping Izzy's brain to connect letters and sounds. That is the thing that has caused all of this growth to happen for both of them. So again, we're just super, super proud of the progress and the life-changing results that they've both seen. So thank you for joining us for the celebration today. Sometimes we get the question, like, is Izzy's data typical? Yeah, it actually is. So when we look at what that statistically significant number is, knowing that the program is absolutely making statistically significant gains, our average kiddo blows that out of the water by double. So our average client is making 1.7 standard deviations of growth within that 16-week interval. So if you want to dig more into these statistics, I promised you a citation. If you want to look at, what are the factors that often influence students, what does typical growth look like? If you want to dig into that, this is here for you. But in general, I want to really highlight why it is so critical to close this gap. Because if Merlisa wouldn't have dug in, if she wouldn't have done the work, inevitably Izzy would have continued missing opportunities, whether it was, I don't feel like I can join this co-op group anymore, I might just have to stay home and not do it. She would have had current and ongoing struggles with her homework. She still would be doing 8 to 10 hours a day, crying, frustrated with homework right now. And instead, she is in a drastically different place. There are future opportunities and things that she may have stopped herself from doing in the future because she didn't believe that she could, or she physically couldn't do it. And then obviously there are other people in the family that get impacted and struggle and suffer because of the child that's just struggling so much. So why it's so critical to close the gap and to actually make significant change in a child's life is that it not only improves academic performance, but it increases their self-esteem and confidence. It gives them better overall mental health and far greater access to opportunities. So with that, I want to just kind of close out with like, so now what? So a lot of the people that listen to our case study reviews listen because they're curious if this is what they're dealing with too. And maybe you heard some things today that caused you to say, actually, we're seeing a lot of the same signs that you described in Izzy. If that's you and you need some help, we do have frequent dyslexia discovery workshops where we will walk you through the assessments and help you to know with certainty if this is something that your child is actually dealing with, or if it's just that they don't like reading. But either way, having that knowledge is really powerful because then you can make a plan for how to support them in the future. And if you're someone who listened to say, that's me, like we have been doing everything that we can think of under the sun, or maybe we just learned that this is the diagnosis that our child has recently, whichever one you are, and you say, yes, it totally makes sense to me that we would address this from the root cause. We know that neurologically that the brain is missing connections between sight and sound. And if it makes sense to actually go right and fix that and help the child to actually reconnect sight and sound together so that they can have massive progress, reach out to our team. We offer complimentary calls to anybody to figure out whether or not your child is truly a good candidate for the program. And if they are, through our interviewing process, we'll definitely let you know that, and we'll talk more to you about what it would look like to enroll you in the program. And if they're not a fit, we'll let you know that too. So either way, you're really out nothing to try to figure out whether or not this program could really help your child to make the kinds of life-altering changes that have happened for Merlisa and Izzy. So with that, I want to thank you for being here and joining us for another one of our graduate case study reviews. We do these every other week. So if you are looking to participate again next time, look for a link in the next 2 weeks, and we'll see you then. Thanks, everyone.